Hello again, everyone. It's nice to be with you once again. Maureen from God's Good Table here, and I'm thinking about spring. I'm gearing up towards, actually, I'm not even waiting for spring to plant. I have some things to plant outside on my deck this week. But I've been thinking a lot about expanding what I can grow here at my own home. And the couple that we're going to interview today is very inspiring to me in that regard. So we're gonna get them on in just a moment. But first, two things. I want to mention quickly about our God's Good Table, God-Given Food as Medicine conference coming up April 25th through 27th at the Melvin's Farm to Fork store and farm, the Montgomery Farm, near Roanoke, Virginia, in Tiny Little Worts. We had a great conference last year. We have reinvited many of the same speakers and have a couple of new ones as well. And we're hoping to see some of you there. These conferences are really, really edifying, informative, just so helpful on so many levels, and we'd love to see you there. We have the conference priced very reasonably so that almost anyone can attend, and we're just hoping to see you there. So Erin will put the link in the show notes for that. The discount is still available for a short time, so you're going to want to check it out very, very soon. And then, as you know, we always like to talk about some of our most favorite products. We're not getting paid to promote these, but we want to share with you the things that we find very useful and very helpful in our own households. And today I am bringing to you a focus on Dr. Cowan's garden products. Dr. Tom Cowan is one of the founding board members of the Weston A. Price Foundation and a friend of mine. I happen to really appreciate him and his insights, and I love his family. So he developed this product line of biodynamically or wild raised vegetable powders, and they are low temperature dehydrated, so the nutrients stay intact. Here is my leek blend. My very favorite is right here. My very favorite one is the threefold savory blend. It comes in these, I don't know how to say the name properly, so I'll just say brown glass jars that protect the nutrient value and integrity of the product inside. And then you can buy refill pouches for every jar that you have. Of course, you can just buy the refill pouches on their own if you'd like. The beet powder is one that I use. I make a salad dressing with this. And of course, you can make borscht and other things. And here's just another. I have ashwagandha. I have leek and wild ramp. But the products are just of excellent quality and great nutritional value. And so I like to keep them on hand to flavor everything from omelets to soups and stews. So you might want to check them out. Discount code GGT20, and Erin is putting the link in the show notes. That aside, I want to welcome our guest today, Billy and Michelle Bond. And we're going to talk about their wonderful, wonderful products, their information, which is a product in and of itself. And they have a few products. So Billy and Michelle, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I'm going to put you back over here, I guess. There we go. Then we can see all of us. You know, I had heard of your names for a long time, but I just had never met you until the Homesteaders Jamboree, the Homesteaders United Jamboree last fall. And as I listened to both of you speak, even just in conversations, I was so very impressed with your love for humanity, your care and concern, your integrity, as well as your knowledge. And so for that reason, we wanted to have a talk with you. We're going to come back and talk about some other things at another time. But for today, I want to put our focus on permaculture, what you've done on your farm, the principles that you teach, and kind of what we can do on our own properties. I have less than an acre, and yet I'm doing quite a bit here and wanting to expand. So I'm eager to learn from you. So Billy and Michelle, would you like to tell a little bit about how you came to the point that you are right now?
Well, it's it's really a long story, but I'll try to condense it as best I can. She was into this long before I was. She was raised a farm girl in a little tiny place in New York, and I was raised a city kid. So right out of the bat, I mean, years ago, she was already into this and wanted a farm, wanted a ranch, wanted all those things, and I wasn't at all on board until I first found Joel Salatin on,
Yeah.
strangely enough, John Stossel. It was on Fox Business years ago. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so at first I was taken by his politics, not even so much by the farming. And as I gathered more information and studied more of his work, slowly but surely I ended up getting on board, because the whole notion of farming to me was like every other city kid out there. You think that, oh, you sit on a tractor. I'm like, man, that sounds like the most boring thing in the world,
I would
until I
agree.
found out, yeah, that it's not the equipment, it's not any of those things. It's the farmer that makes the farm.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I realized that, I was hook, line, and sinker. And so it's been a lifelong study since that time. I mean, just a voracious appetite for every and anything permaculture, preparedness, practical living,
Yeah.
anything homesteading. I'm on board. But she brought me in initially kicking and dragging, but she was already, this is exactly her passion from the very beginning. But I ended up, developing the same passion, maybe to an even higher extent in some
Yeah,
areas.
probably. Yeah, my mom's side of the family had a dairy farm in like the New York, Pennsylvania area. And I always knew that I wanted to farm, but I knew I did not want to milk cows. So
Mm.
um I joined the military, and then years later we were living in Kansas. I was going to KU, and in Lawrence, that's when they first had the Mother Earth News fairs, and that's where we first met Joel Salatin. And he was, you know, I didn't want to do the dairy farm, so the other option was like buy thousands of acres and do, which wasn't an option. So he made it a like, I think he made farming available for the people that didn't have millions of dollars to put into it.
And that don't want to maintain a 1,000-acre or more farmstead and want to do things naturally. And
Right.
it's difficult to do things in a non-toxic, regenerative way when you are managing thousands of acres anyway,
Mhm.
right?
It doesn't necessarily have to be, but that's where we've kind of lost our way as a society, is that Joel manages thousands of acres and he's able to do it. A number of others do as well. So the beauty about what he does is that it can be scaled up or down depending on your needs. I mean, there are people in South Africa working 1 million acres with cattle herds and stuff. So it can
Yeah.
be done. It's just we've been led to believe that it has to be done in a very reductionistic way, and it doesn't have to be, no matter where you find yourself in that continuum.
And it's worth noting too that Joel and his family started out with 200 acres or 160, I don't remember which. And it was virtually dead land, gullies, and not growing anything, but they used regenerative practices, and without planting a single seed, created this amazing farm that grows lots of food for the community. And yes, he has expanded, and I'm acquainted with some of his people who take on the task of rotationally grazing cattle, for instance, on their own land, or that manage some of the properties that he rents. But he does this, of course, on a larger scale because he has help to do it. But for most of us, we don't have that. And I don't even desire that, honestly. But most of us are just looking for a way to produce good quality food without toxic chemicals and utilize the space that we have, whether large or small. And I think that that's really one of the two biggest things about permaculture that make this attractive, and that I think is valuable for people to learn. The other one being that permaculture is also a visually can be a visually appealing way, as well as a nutritionally and and sustainable way of growing food. Much different than the conventional model, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, that's the beauty about having Joel as a gateway drug, is that what he
Yeah.
opens you up to, because we found ourselves looking into the work of people like Jim Garrett, Greg Judy, Stefan
Yeah.
Soviak when it comes to my orchards and stuff like that. And that's the beauty about this space, about this whole homesteading and gardening and permaculture and animal rearing space, is that no matter where you find yourself or where you may find your biggest interest may be. Now, initially, I would have never guessed the trees and animals would have been my biggest passion. And because of so many incredible teachers out there that have done all the work for you, essentially, I mean, if you can just follow instructions, you can get to the finish line on just about anything, because so many people have actually done all the legwork for you. And if you can just apprentice, so to speak, even virtually under some of these people, you can absorb what's useful and then cut and paste, if you will, whatever they have, bring it back to your place, and then you can really get it off and running if that's something you want to do. Or maybe you decide, okay, I've given it a shot and I don't necessarily care for it.
Right. I know that 35 years ago, I think my husband and I wanted to raise food for our family in a clean and nutritionally profitable way. And we did not have the internet, and there weren't even many books at all yet. But Joel started to come into prominence probably in the mid 90s, I'm guessing. And then it became possible to really start learning a lot about how, and the why I already had, but the how is so important. And it's also important to understand that it doesn't have to be difficult. I'm guessing that you would say the same.
Oh, absolutely. Michelle, feel free to jump in here anytime.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. I mean, let's say you find yourself in an apartment. Okay. If you
Yeah.
grow mushrooms in a closet, you are by definition a farmer. If you grow microgreens in an extra room, you are by definition a farmer. So there is absolutely, that's the beauty about all this. Before Joel came along, everybody by and large thought a farmer had to fit within this particular criteria. I'll give
Right.
you an example. Early on in some of our earliest videos, we had like a little section called Permaculture at Work. I was still working on my tools as a journeyman electrician at that particular time in Texas. And on the job site, on construction sites, I literally talked them into allowing me to plant a food forest and to run chickens on the job site. So
Wow.
I was farming at work and
That's
working
cool.
12-hour days at the same time. So, and then, it became such a hit around there. I mean, Maureen, here's where it really got cool is other businesses around there saw what I was doing on a construction site, and they were now coming to me with their hat in their hands. Had we stayed there, I would have had access of about 100 acres at this point of free land that I didn't have to buy. I don't have the tax burden of. I could have been farming. All they wanted was somebody to maintain that property, and they didn't care how it was done. So there's land
Wow.
out there. You don't have to be the Rockefellers to go out here and buy the land. It's like Greg Judy always teaches. You don't have to own the land. You just need to control it.
Yeah. Well, I always say that he who rules the food supply rules the people, and that's why it's really important to seek out if you truly don't have enough space yourself, but you want food security for yourself and your family and maybe your community, then it is advantageous to seek out working relationships like that. Or if you already have some ground and you're utilizing it, we can utilize it better and still perhaps find situations like you're talking about so that we can do more. Are you familiar with the family in Southern California that for years has been utilizing their, I think, 2/10 of an acre yard? I don't remember their name.
Yeah.
I need to find them again, but they are such a good example because they produce meat, eggs, honey, milk, vegetables, fruit. And they not only have enough for their own family, which is, I think, now a family of 6, the mother's gone and a couple of the kids they're all adults and some are married. They're providing not only for themselves, but they're selling to farmers markets and restaurants. And I believe that they share with their community as well. I bring them up and they come to the forefront of my mind often because I hear people say, oh, I'd really love to do that, but I just can't. I don't have any land, or I just can't. I live in town, or I just can't. When in actuality, you actually can do far more than most people ever think about or realize.
Well, and also the yard, like if people would just use the lawn and the yard that they have
Mhm.
to grow food or to do a food forest,
Yes.
you would be able to grow so much. But
Yeah.
we're just trained to think that our yard has to be just green grass and we got to mow it every weekend.
Yes. Or meticulously landscaped, all of that. Does it bother you to hear this propaganda, is what I think it is, that we just simply cannot feed the world? We have too many people. We can't feed the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And you think about those yards, or you think about, like, Billy, that's amazing that you were able to use an actual job site to produce food instead of just mowing or weed whacking or whatever. It
Yeah,
just,
if you just pay attention when you're driving around to just how much land is going unused, just
yeah.
if it's a yard or if it's just areas along the roadside. I mean, there's so much underutilized land in the United States. If we'd actually use even a small portion of what's available, we could feed communities.
We can feed
Right.
the world, truly. I mean, take
Yeah.
example like Joel was the first one to talk about. If we just grazed the sides
Yes.
of our interstates, we could feed the entire planet. In fact, this is definitely part of the powers that shouldn't be would have us to believe that it is not possible to do what we know what we're doing. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, Maureen, last year we had to give away 3 pigs. We have 8 freezers out there. All of them are packed full with meat that
Wow.
we grow ourselves. And basically that all that meat in there is a byproduct of just good management. There was so much abundance left over that we gave away all the chickens that we produced. We gave away
Wow.
3 pigs and showed the people how to process them. And we raised all of those animals, and we got the videos to prove it. That's part of the reason why we started the YouTube channel, because we were doing all of these revolutionary things and we had no record of it. We had no way of conveying this to other people. We did all of this with food scraps. So we raised basically all of our ruminants for free, all of our layers for free, and making money in the process, because in the system we use, which is called the chicken tractor on steroids, we were
Mhm.
not only producing all of the eggs, all of the meat from that chicken system, we were also producing at the same time 1 to 3 cubic yards of finished compost per week.
Yes.
And
That is so important, and I'm glad you bring that up because I utilize a system. I live in a county that doesn't allow us to. We're not allowed to have pigs. We're not allowed to have turkeys and ducks and cows and goats and sheep and all of that, which drives me nuts, the bureaucrats making the laws. So I use chickens and I push the limit on that, but I have a closed system. I cannot let my chickens out loose or I get in a lot of trouble, but they have an expansive space and I utilize them to produce compost for my plants. So
that's a
you're doing the same thing.
That's a winner. But also we specialize in situations like you're in, where we use that mental jujitsu against the powers that shouldn't be. Just because they have a law doesn't mean that it's a just law. For example, you're going to tell me that I can and can't. You're going to tell me the powers that shouldn't be are going to tell me how I can and can't produce food. Well, I'll tell you one thing I hope somebody actually does out there, and I've been screaming this from the mountaintops. So you can't have pigs. You can't have, I don't know, roosters. Tell them next time you get out there, are you allowed to have dogs in your neighborhood? Okay, so you can have
Yep.
dogs. You can have dogs that bark all night. So tell them that your pigs identify as dogs.
That's a good way of, yep.
I mean, honestly, I would seriously, everybody who lives in an HOA or anything like it, if when they tell you you can't have this animal, you can't have that, I would tell them. I mean, I would use that mental jujitsu and put it in reverse.
Yeah.
Say, look, this animal identifies as my whatever. I mean, whatever's
Yeah.
legal, and then see what they say about that. Because I mean,
Yeah.
if anybody can be whatever they want these days, well, why not your animals?
Yep, why not? That makes sense to me. And I did have about 9 years ago, the local sheriff's department, animal control officer, or whatever department it was, come out and tell me that we couldn't have chickens. And technically, I'm supposed to get a permit for that from the county to have any, and I refuse to do that. I won't ask permission from my county government, for that kind of thing. I just had 6 hens at the time, and I did give them to a daughter because at the time I had a bobcat that was picking them off, and we weren't yet prepared to really make a secure shelter. They were mostly loose, and one of my neighbors did not appreciate that, so temporarily they went away. But I told that officer, I said, our state, I actually wasn't 100% certain about this, but I've looked it up. Most states have a constitutional law, really, that's the real law, that says that you have a right to produce your food. You have a right to farm. And so I told this officer that, and she couldn't argue. She walked away and it was done and over with. Now I push the limits on how many, and I have a rooster. But when you are in a neighborhood, you don't want to upset your neighbors. And so I went around to all of my neighbors and asked them, do you mind if I have a rooster? And they all love my rooster. So even if the county doesn't like the rooster, I'll just call him my pet.
Your service animal. It could be your service rooster.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Service rooster, service pig, service cow. Why
Yep.
not? I mean, I think it's absolutely absurd that they would make these restrictions.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of those things really work out for the worst in North Carolina, especially after this hurricane. They're doing those types of things right now where they're retroactively making, we had the rules a certain way, and then all of a sudden the powers that shouldn't be decide, oh, we're going to change these up and not to benefit we the people. So I'm not going to encourage everybody out there to do this, but my policy is and has always been and will always be that I do not obey unjust laws. And telling me that I can't produce my own food is an unjust law. So I
agree.
Play along.
I agree. And the one neighbor who told me no pigs doesn't live here anymore. So I'm thinking, maybe a couple of piglets in the spring. But so getting past the politics and all of that, what are some suggestions you might have for someone who's thinking about it and they want to jump in and start producing their own food and in a permaculture fashion? And I say this, I like permaculture far more than traditional gardening and obviously farming, but most people have never even heard of it. And I think it's just such a more appealing, attractive, and doable means of accomplishing our food goals. So thinking outside of the box, as obviously you guys do, what are some things that we can encourage our viewers to be thinking about?
I would say start small. We've got a room where we've got just some shelving, simple shelving, and we've got some some lights, and we grow microgreens just year round. So like you could just start growing microgreens for you to eat. It doesn't take much infrastructure. You could also start with mushrooms.
Yeah.
Like growing mushrooms in your closet. There's a couple of things, or use your front porch or your backyard. Try a potted, you could even do a tree. You could just start with a small tree or tomatoes or peppers. I mean, there's some things you can do just even if you're in the city. We have, there's one of our friends, Eric Sider, he used to live in an urban, like in an apartment, and out on his balcony, he had he utilized every bit of that space. He had so many things growing on the balcony.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can start with what you have.
And it was even facing in the wrong direction. I mean, he had a little pond out there even. So, I mean, he had aquaculture, he had everything going. But if I could just kind of, I can't overemphasize this enough. The number one problem in most new homesteaders or anybody thinking about getting into this space, and I'm just going to put an exclamation point on what Michelle said, is that they do too much too soon.
Yes.
And they go out here, put a 1 acre garden in, and they don't realize how much maintenance that's going to require.
Yeah.
Or the biggest, Maureen, I'm not going to win any fans for this, but I've never really cared about that sort of thing. So I'm just going to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I've seen more examples. I would say 95% of most of the homesteads we visit are complete wrecks. And it's because they put way too many animals on too little land.
Yes. Amen to that.
I have seen more feedlots that are supposed to be farms, and it's a simple fix. Like, I'll give you a prime example. We are in the middle of January, probably arguably one of the coldest times of the year.
Mhm.
We are still feeding grass to our sheep out there. But most people have been feeding hay around here since August.
Yes.
Now, if you're in this business, and it is a business, if you're in this partially to make money or to raise your own food, well, you're not doing it very effectively if all of your money is going out the front door in the form of buying hay. If you would just adjust your management strategies, back off on the number of animals you have, it's easier to correct too few animals than it is to have way too many. And that is, Michelle, would you disagree that the number one problem out there with most homesteaders is far too many animals?
They start off, a lot of them feel a sense of, I have to do everything right now, instead of start small, learn it, and then progress. And also, like, I think many of us maybe shouldn't have the mindset of, I have to produce everything for myself. When you get into it, figure out what you like, figure out what you don't like, and do the things that you like and that you have the resources for, and maybe barter for the other things that you don't have, rather than think like, so many people think they have to have whatever it is, like, let's just say a milk cow, when they really don't have the land, because a milk cow takes a lot of resources.
Yep.
And many just don't have that. So maybe just barter for your milk and produce what you can.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And years ago, I wrote an article titled "Feeding Your Family Well on a Near Zero Budget." And that was one of the points that I make in that. You establish relationships with the farmers and the farm stands and your neighbors around you. And then, yes, you help each other out, you barter. But I really do appreciate the point about going in too big, too fast. And one near and dear to me had a homestead for years that was one of those that had way too many animals. It was smelly, it was ugly. They had problems with predator control all the time. And keeping animals confined to their appropriate places, and I don't mean confined, but if it's a family, you don't need a massive amount of animals. If you're going into it to earn money and you don't have very much land, maybe stick with things that are small, like chickens and rabbits. Is that something you would suggest?
Absolutely. The golden rule out there, and Greg Judy's right when he says it, I think, is if you see bare ground, it's an open indication of poor management.
Yes.
So if I see mud everywhere, because that is not nature's natural function.
Right.
Nature's modest. She loves to be covered.
Yes.
And so when I see mud everywhere, that's usually an open indication. And I can't overemphasize this enough, Maureen, for all the people out there that are considering this life. If I would say too many animals is number one, and And I can't even tell you how far away distant number 2 is, because that is without a doubt the number 1 problem. There's not even a close number 2. And I don't know why everybody does it. I mean, we do videos out here showing, hey, that ground needs time to rest. It needs time. It needs time to recover. It needs all these different things. Now, it's one thing if you do a high density model where, let's say, you run your cows over it first, or maybe you run your cows with your sheep. They hit it hard, and then you run your chickens and then your ducks. Then you're going to let it sit for about 45 days, but people are either not moving their animals. It's the dead of winter, and we're on a rotation when right now we move our animals every 3 days. And if you smell anything but natural, fresh country air, then you're not doing it properly.
Yeah, I agree.
That's usually the open indication, but I can't emphasize that enough. I know that's like the 4th time I said it, but no matter how many times I say it, and people that come to us for advice, that's why I don't do the consultation thing anymore, because it becomes a frustration to where I'm openly pointing out, hey, do not get too many animals. And then overwhelmingly, that's exactly what everybody does, especially folks that are new to this space, or they go broke feeding hay, and they could have avoided all of it.
Yeah. Now, when you do not have good ground, and we were in that situation when we first bought our 10-acre farmstead, it had been monocropped for like dozens of years. We did not have good ground, but my husband he put up fences. And I would talk with my friend Jerry Brunetti, who you probably are not aware of, but years ago, he was very big in sustainable and regenerative agriculture, spoke all over the world. And he told me to get started, just put hay out for the animals in the pasture, because we didn't have good ground. And another friend of mine lives on the sandy soil in southern New Jersey. She didn't have ground even to put vegetables in. So she started getting she'd go to the grocery stores and bring buckets, and they would take all of the produce that they would be pitching, and they'd put it in their buckets. She'd take it home. She'd lay it on the ground with wood chips, and I mean wood chips, not sawdust. And before too long, she had soil. I've done the same thing here at our farm. It's not a farm, but at our home, I like to say that it grows rocks really well, and this mountain does. But I wanted to have some grassy areas, and I also wanted to have a place to grow food. And so I contacted, back to Eden Style, I contacted tree trimming companies. And I got about 3 big, massive loads of wood chips. I'm not talking just the inner wood, but the whole tree. That's important. And I had it dumped. That's actually where I ended up putting our chicken run. And again, it's large and it's open. I have it divided, part for food and part for chickens. And I utilize the chickens in and out of that space anyway. But I actually built soil that I plant things in different parts of our yard just by doing that. So, but back to the farm, it was dead. It grew thistles and it grew burdock and things like that with very deep roots. And I'd like you to elaborate on this too, because I know you know about it, that every plant has a purpose. There's no such thing as weeds. And so you can evaluate the condition of your soil by looking at what is naturally growing there. And then because our pasture land was so poor quality, it was a matter of bringing in minerals and good quality hay for a period of time. And within, the second year, we had grasses and things for the cattle to eat. We only had a cow and a calf each year for a while. But my point is, you can build soil even when you don't have soil. And if you want to get started with animals and the soil quality is low, that is a place where maybe you do use hay for a time. But then, we 3 or 4, definitely 5 years later, we had verdant pastures. And and very little need for bringing in hay at all. So that's, to your point, occasionally to get started, you might need that.
Yeah, and that's an excellent technique. If you just have bare ground. I was talking with a friend that they cleared an area and they just have bare ground, and she was wanting to know what to do. Like, should she go buy a bunch of seeds and seed? But like you said, you don't even have to do that. Put your
Right.
animals on it, put a ton of hay down and rotate them through. And like you said, within a relatively short amount of time, a couple 5 years, you're going to have some pretty good pasture there.
Yeah.
And
I've seen
like,
that work.
yeah, and like you talked about the burdock too, that has a deep taproot, and the purpose of it is to break up that hard soil. So yeah, pay attention to what is growing and let it grow, and it will evolve into what it needs.
Yeah.
Well,
It really will.
to that point also, like you said, those things that everybody calls weeds, this is why I truly wish in every single high school in the United States of Amnesia, there was a permaculture course, because it makes you redefine everything you think you see out there. You think that you need a lawn, and the only reason you think you need that is because this is an old thing coming all the way back to the New Atlantis. I can't remember who wrote that book, but basically around the time of the founding fathers, where we were believing that we had to make nature work within Sir Francis Bacon, by the way, who wrote that book, where we seem to think that we need to make nature conform to our needs, when we fail to realize that every step we take towards nature will take 10 steps back to you if you do it in accordance to nature.
Right.
So that's where everybody's kind of missing the boat on this, is that they think they got to go out there, apply all this and that and this, when all you really need to do is put down a carbon layer, which you did in the form of wood chips. And then in other areas where it was a method like Greg Judy does, where he finds a, awful place, just roll out a round bale. Your animals are going to eat a third, they're going to stomp a third, and then you leave a third. And then what comes up through there will only improve with good management, will only get better and better and better every year, because our number one export right now down the Mississippi is soil. And it doesn't have to be. And it goes right back to what Bill Mollison said, that the problems of this world become more and more complex, but the solutions are embarrassingly simple. They really are. And this is why I wish so many young people have had a little bit of a background, even if it were an elective in a high school, or, I know Bill Mollison was bitterly opposed to this being in standard education models, but even in a homeschool curriculum, if people were to take a permaculture design course, you'll rethink everything you think is a problem out there, because you automatically realize that every problem has multiple solutions. And that's part of what a permaculture design certificate allows you to, it allows you to expand your thinking, where I'm not looking at that forb as a weed, I'm looking at it as a forb. It's helping to keep all of my pasture. It has such a deep taproot that it's anchoring everything together out there. And we tend to think, oh, let's go out there with a Roundup, let's go knock this out. We just need grass. And it goes back to our reductionistic thinking out there. And we just need a new model. And sadly, when you hit a culture that's becoming as decadent as ours, sadly, history has proven that the crucible of really hard times is the only thing that ever seems to really fix it. So absolutely, there are easy solutions out there, and it doesn't require Roundup.
Right, it doesn't. And I think the faith affirming, beautiful part of this is that it's all part of God's design. And he gives us instructions for how to produce food and how to steward the land. And we've come so far away from that in this country, and actually around the world. But I'm sure you're familiar with the Allen Savory Institute.
Oh, yes.
Oh man, such wonderful work, where he teaches people, whether in Africa or Alabama, he teaches them how to utilize the very principles we're talking about, including utilizing animals in the process, to take what is desertified and make it fertile ground And they're all just God-given principles, but we ignore that. I loved, we've got Caleb on, and Caleb chimed in last week about when we were talking with Mike and Lacey Dixon, and he chimed in about how he was growing things even in his apartment bathtub. But when we are making sure, as he points out, that each animal is sustainable on its own, we're building soil and we're building perennial plant growth. Now, one of the other things that plants such as burdock do, they bring minerals up from deep down in the earth, where at the surface level, maybe they've been depleted because of improper agricultural practices or chemical usage. And so they hold the ground intact, they bring minerals up. And then when you utilize a system that incorporates, especially, I don't believe we can have truly fertile soils without animal input. So when you do things right, do you find that, as in the example of our farm, that the land becomes beautiful, the land becomes productive, and it's all very pleasant and pleasing, while you're also at the same time reaping the nutritional rewards from doing things just the way God designed.
Well, it's like the Almighty knew what he was doing. How about that? I mean,
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? Wow, what a surprise.
yeah. Yeah. So when you get down to brass tacks on a lot of this stuff, and this is what we had to find out, or at least what I had to find out the hard way, is as long as I do it in accordance, okay, I can walk out this door, I can go out into the forest that's out back, and I can look at every forest, and I can immediately tell you just by this little verification, every healthy forest should have 7 layers. There should be an overstory, there should be an understory, there should be shrubs, vines, ground cover, herbaceous layer, roots, and then I would argue even that there's a number 8, and that would be your mycelial layer, and there's
Yes.
probably a number of more, quite a few more. Now, if your forest doesn't have all 7 layers, or 8, I dare say, then maybe it isn't healthy. If it's a monocrop of just pines, well, I guarantee you it's not healthy. If it's a monocrop of everything, because you don't see that, that's not the way the good Lord put it together.
Right.
So whenever we put in a food forest or an orchard, that's exactly the way we design it. We put it in with the understanding that we are going to have, I could take you down to my food forest right now. You will see nearly all 7 layers out there, because that's, if I go out in the nature and I look around, that's exactly how the good Lord did it. He didn't put it in lines and rows, even though there's nothing wrong with that. He didn't put it in lines and rows. He didn't sequester all of the animals out of there. Yeah, that picture you have on the screen, I look like I'm a convict, but
no, no, but I put it up there because and I have one of your son William too, which is right there. And I like that slide because I know he's an advocate for all of this too. You've raised him very well. But you're seeing kind of 3 layers right there. While we cannot see the forest behind, what we do see is utilizing what God gave us. And while you're growing food for people, the pigs, they are also enriching the soil. Pigs are such wonderful farm tools, I find.
Well, in that picture, let me tell you what they were actually doing there, because we came into a place, we bought a property that was totally unbalanced, meaning that in that particular area, all there was multiflora rose and
blackberry.
So when you will never see thorns grow up out of a compost pile. So if you see blackberries, you see multiflora rose, you know that your soil isn't wonderful. So what do? We use those pigs as our 4-wheel drive to go in there and naturally uproot those areas and put down their fertility. So we feed our pigs with organic food scraps. So what I would do is take those food scraps, put them over anything I wanted removed, and that's exactly where I'd feed them. So if I wanted to access, let's say, a multiflora rose bush, I would have the pigs go through first. I'd feed them around there. They would clear it out to give me access to go in with a chainsaw or whatever it was I needed. Well, to this day, none of that stuff has come back. So we use these animals as a tool, And now, if I were to take you down there right now, everything I described, since there was only 2 layers, actually, there was really 1 layer.
Yeah, it
and
was just really
basically
just
a shrub layer.
Yeah.
A shrub layer of all thorns and viney. Well, it was basically all thorns out there. Well, we went from a single layer to all 7 layers in that very spot where that picture was taken. Well, actually, it was 2 layers. We had a little bit of a ground cover, but it wasn't much. So we went from 2 layers to 7 layers, and that can be your barometer. So you can use those animals, even though we live in a part of the country where people call that slavery by using pigs to do the pigness of the pig, as Joel puts it. Yeah,
I often wonder what those people actually think about if we open the gates and let all the animals go loose. What kind of a life are they going to really have? They don't understand the importance of stewardship of animals and forests and farms and all of that.
Well, and I don't think that they've ever just watched animals. Like if you ever have just watched chickens or watched pigs work, I don't think that you could view that as slavery if you've actually just watched them. And I think pigs, that's another thing I would encourage people is pigs are my favorite animal to raise. And I think they are the easiest animal to raise.
Yeah, pigs and chickens in my book. Yeah.
Yeah, they're easier than any kind of ruminant, goats for sure.
Easier than chicken.
Yeah. So I mean, and they're a joy to raise also.
And they can
They're
be
hysterical.
Yes.
They're such great entertainment. I'm sorry, Billy, go ahead.
Well, no, they can be incredible tools as long as she doesn't fall in love with them. That's another big risk when you do this work. Because at the end
I know that feeling. I completely get that, but there comes a point, doesn't it, when we just know, well, this is food and we can cry our tears, wipe them away and butcher.
Well, that's where, we have our strengths, that's where I come into play. And that's not really her strong point, but she has strong points that I'm not crazy about. So we're able to spare one another the burdens. Like, for example, I can't stand doing laundry, but she doesn't mind it. She can't stand doing dishes, but I don't mind it. So
you work together cooperatively. Yeah.
Yeah. So the same exact thing works out there too, but that's the distance. I told you, number 1 is too many animals. Number 2 is falling in love with those animals.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you're going to have a petting zoo if you can't cull your problem children out there, and you're always going to have them. But going back to the pigs, it's dreadful. It is absolutely dreadful. Some of these scenarios and situations we've seen pigs in. For example, there was an organic farm down in Louisiana that you and I visited, and they were certified organic, fed their pigs nothing but organic feed. But if you saw the place and smelled the place, it would absolutely blow your mind that they could even call this place organic, because it was an awful mess where they where they had these pigs at. Yeah. So and that's where we go right back to permaculture, is that I'm not going to put more animals out there than the land can support. In that particular place, the pigs enjoyed every single day of their life, every single day of their lives. And we didn't put them in a trailer, take them to a processing facility where they smelled death 10 miles away.
Yeah.
Their last day was on this farm. They didn't see it coming. And we totally respected that animal by using 100% of there was not a single part of it that went to waste. So what we didn't eat, we gave to the dogs, and what the dogs didn't eat, the compost pile ate.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing, should be doing. Now, my family was not prepared to handle the largest animals. And so what we took to doing was killing the animal in the pasture without it knowing anything, just drop, done. And then we'd usually gut, and then we'd haul it off to the abattoir. So even if you're not able to butcher a large animal like a pig or a bull, you can still at least grant that animal a great life. We had one case where an animal was being taken off for slaughter at the local abattoir, and the ride over was difficult. And I told my husband, we're never doing this again. And we never did. That was when we just started dispatching on farm in the field. They didn't know, there was no cognizance whatsoever of what was happening. It was just boom, done and gone. Because that is, I think that's really important too. We don't want our animals to undergo any stress, any concern. We do love our animals. If you don't really care about not just the well-being in a physical way of your animal, but if you don't care about your animals as creatures of God that he created, then I think you probably shouldn't even be doing this.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
Well, also there, I want to leave a little space out there for the people that don't have an option B. You know, I am a classically trained butcher, so you know I have that, and I've been trying to evangelize this thing forever and a day. I mean, Michelle will tell you, I couldn't give away a butcher's class 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now people are falling over themselves, begging me to come out there and show them how to do it now that times are getting a little bit tough. But, you know, I do, there are some decent abattoirs out there. You can get that done. But at the end of the day, if there's any possibility whatsoever, if it's a pig on down, you can absolutely positively do it on farm. You're going to need a little help sometimes, or maybe all of the time, or maybe you don't have, you know, many hands make light work. So, you know, maybe go out there, watch one of my butchery videos, and then, you know, get everybody together, gather around step by step. I mean, we have a paid version. You can do it that way, or you can do the free version on YouTube where I basically show you everything. Show you everything from start to finish. And we're not fusing DNA here. If you can do a chicken, you can definitely do anything else.
Yeah. I did help with larger animals on our farm and elsewhere, but my husband was just not willing or equipped to go that route. So the largest animals that we butchered before we sold the farm were our sheep. And Michelle, they were my friends. I loved the sheep.
I know, I understand.
I did not do the deed.
Yeah, I struggle with that too. The pigs, I can separate myself. You know, when the pigs, there's piglets, they're cute, but I'm able to distance myself as they get older.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it is about baby lambs and sheep, but I'm telling you, it is very difficult for me.
It's so bad, Maureen. We got freezers full of sheep out there, and I'm talking like hair sheep, the best sheep there is.
Oh.
And I'm eating lamb chops for dinner last night. She's eating steak because she won't even eat the lamb. Even
I was able to eat it, but I could not kill it.
No. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know. Even cattle are, you know, I don't know what it is about sheep, but I just get too attached to them.
Yeah, I do too. And the other thing that I did one time and never again was a gander, a Toulouse gander. We had a small flock, and they're just too much like us in social structure. I couldn't handle the aftermath, or even I almost quit before I even did the deed. And I did not eat the gander. I produced it for Thanksgiving, and I couldn't eat it. So I probably could have if somebody else had done it, but I think we as women in particular, we're so emotionally soft and tender. We see these creatures, and I was like that usually with our bull calves as well. It was hard, but I recognize, as I think we all need to, that these are creatures that God gave us for several really good purposes, and we need to appreciate that and not take it lightly.
I agree. I agree. That's one thing that getting into this that that I learned quickly was I appreciate, whereas before I didn't appreciate the meat every time I ate it, but when you raise it, you know how much work went into it. You know that with each pig, you don't get an unlimited amount of bacon. There's it's not an unlimited source. So I think you appreciate your meat significantly more when you raise it than when you just go to the grocery store
And you
buy
ration it to a certain extent,
Yeah.
because I know that like on those pigs you saw there, those were red wattles. And on each pig, I got somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30 pounds of bacon on each. Now, 30 pounds. Okay. So I'm sitting here doing the math in my head. I'm like, okay, man, if I want to eat a pound of bacon a week, I mean, how do I go about this? Or, so you gotta think about those things. Or how often do you eat pork chops? Or, as a butcher, it doesn't make having a small family, it doesn't make a sense. It doesn't make sense for us to cook an entire 30-pound ham. So I can take those hams and break them down into ham roasts and do other things with them. So, or even turn the grind depending on what we need. We like a lot of sausage, so we may use it that way. That's another benefit of knowing how to do this stuff and processing it. And honestly, at the end of the day, when you sit down at the table and you know that the meat I'm eating it, when you're eating it, you're like, okay, I know this was raised properly. It was dispatched properly. And please don't misunderstand. I'm not being flip about the dispatching part of it, because it's a very solemn and sacred act. It really is. And every butchery class I teach, I make sure, sometimes you don't know who's in there, but at the end of the day, I'm a blood-bought soldier of Christ. So we're going to thank the good Lord for the bounty that he's provided. And we pray before. That's how sacred this is to me, to be able to take that animal's life and know that we are respecting it to the highest degree, because unlike the butcher shops out there, we are using everything. So just like the great Jeff Lawton said, if it lived, it can live again in another form, obviously.
Yeah. That's a wonderful thought that we all should be keeping in mind. It's a cycle that has been going on from the beginning of time and will only end when Jesus comes back for us. And it's a beautiful thing. Two last things, and one is going to be very short, and that is just the discussion of pigs, shellfish, unclean foods. I want to revisit that. I've been thinking on maybe you want to come on and talk about this. I've read a lot of different articles, heard people speak, have a book that someone gave me who advocate for a strictly Old Testament diet. I disagree, and I have my own thought process there. Obviously, you do too. And I'd like to come back and do a show specifically on clean versus unclean foods, why it matters, why it mattered then, why it doesn't matter now, or what. And I actually want to have the viewpoint on as well from someone who is following those practices. I don't fault anyone for that. I have not a problem with that. However, personally, I do believe it's a personal choice, and I choose to eat foods that were considered unclean, and I think that we have great benefit from them. But that's a discussion. I don't know if that's something that you would like to talk about another time. Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm going to put you down for that. But the other thing is that we've talked a lot about animals, and that is super critical. But suppose we're just wanting to get started with growing fruits and vegetables. What are some tips you would have for people just to get started with utilizing their space in that regard?
Well, do you want to start, honey, or do you want me?
I would say, I would just reiterate, use the space that you have. Get really good at growing with the space that you have, whether that's indoors, microgreens. I mean, we have microgreens growing constantly, and we've got all different types. We've got kale, cabbage, arugula. I mean, there's so many different microgreens that you can grow. Mushrooms, you can grow mushrooms. Your front porch. I mean, get really good at growing with the space that you have.
In addition to that, I would also say, like, let's say you have a postage stamp backyard. To what Michelle's saying, this is why I'm saying a permaculture education is of unbelievable value, because we don't just plant anything in isolation. For example, around every one of our fruit trees around here, you're going to find rosemary, thyme, and oregano. You're going to also find in opposite corners at a distance a little further away, you're going to find comfrey plants, which has incredible medicinal values.
Yep.
And then in opposite corners of that, we're going to put maybe low or high bush blueberries, depending on where you live. And then remember, there's 7 layers. Yep, there's some comfrey. So there's 7 layers of a forest. So people kind of restrict themselves thinking that they got that mulch ring around the tree, all they can grow is that tree. That is absurd. And it doesn't work that way in nature. So on the inner ring, we could be putting things like garlic. On the outer ring, things that can help protect your tree, like daffodils. We put an inner and an outer ring of daffodils. Plus, it's the first thing to pop in spring. And it's also a natural deer repellent. It's also a natural.
I didn't know that.
Yes, they find them repulsive. So it is, now it's depending on your deer pressure, it may not do the entire trick, but that's why we put an inner and an outer ring of daffodils. There is a ton of food. People think, well, I got that fruit tree there. Well, there's so much that you could put. You have microclimates under that fruit tree. You could put maybe gooseberries on the back side where it's shaded. Maybe there's something that likes the sun, like a blueberry on the other side.
Yeah.
So every single tree, there could be 15 to 20 other cultivars of things within those 7 layers that you could be growing on there. I mean, like climbing yams, we got them growing up our nitrogen fixing trees.
Good.
Yes, you could have all these different things growing in a small footprint. So learn to think about growing vertically. Think about how much you could stack in a single function, because that is the way that the good Lord put it in nature.
I would also like to add one of the big lessons that we learned after this hurricane came through was the importance of building community. And I think we sometimes think that we have to do everything. And if you're in an urban area, that's probably not possible, but you can build relationships with people where you can get maybe more reliable sources of meat, vegetables, whatever it is that you want. So that way, if the grocery store does not have any food like it did here right after the hurricane, you still have those sources that you can go to that where you can get your meat, your vegetables, whatever, if you're not in a situation to produce it.
Right. And I think also what I'm hearing you guys say too is instead of thinking the way most people do about growing food is that you've got to have straight rows of garden beds and it's got to be tilled and all of that. When we're talking permaculture, we're utilizing, again, natural and God-given principles that can be beautiful. And we shouldn't be rototilling, right?
Right.
And you don't have to have everything growing in a garden bed or a traditional garden shape, but you can plant things, just the idea of planting the daffodils under the fruit trees instead of having just an orchard that you mow. Now, I used to put the chickens and the sheep through our orchard when we had the orchard on the farm. But one of the things that I like about permaculture is that it can be very attractive. And again, thinking outside of the box, we don't have to think about everything being in straight rows and beds. So your fruit trees, for instance, you mentioned an orchard, but I'm sure that you have more than just fruit trees and daffodils.
Oh, good night. Down in these orchards, we have, you name it. We try to stack as much in terms of that space that we possibly can. Because we're also educators. So we're trying to show what can be done in these environments. So, I mean, like our ground cover, instead of having grass, what do we use?
Yeah, we've got strawberries as our ground cover.
We're walking on food to get to the food. We produced in this one area, I mean, in a like a postage stamp area, probably 100 gallons of strawberries that we had to walk on just to go and get to the other things. So instead of just having grass out there, we had so many strawberries. We stopped at 100 gallons. I mean, we couldn't even spend all of our time just picking them. So our ground cover, every single layer was edible all the way up from the ground cover, all the way up to the tree itself.
And I would say also think about your perennial rather than start seeds every spring. See how many varieties you can grow that are perennial, and they're going to come back every single year. Like rhubarb, asparagus is just a couple of them.
Yeah.
Jerusalem artichokes is another thing. Just there's a book out there called Perennial Vegetables. I don't remember who wrote it, but yeah, that's what I try to put in, especially your raspberries, things like that. You
Yeah.
can
Your kale, perennial kale, you got some down there too.
Yeah, plant once and then it comes back every year.
Yeah, I love that. I even have small grains in my garden where the chickens go. That way they can harvest their own and they self-seed just like the tomatoes do. I have one question though. You mentioned the strawberries and talking about fruit trees and such. How do you protect the harvest so you get it instead of the critters?
Well, it's because that is a loaded question, but
That's a big thing.
well, here's how we solved it. When we first got here, and I knew I wanted to put in trees everywhere because this place, we bought it because it was a mess and nobody wanted it. So I would put in trees down there and the deer would absolutely positively decimate everything out there. So started looking for solutions, and I settled on this product called bone sauce. Now,
Thank you.
it's 1,000 years. Nobody really knows how old it is, but I can't remember the guy who basically Sepp Holzer basically made everybody know about it. Well, I found out about it. It took me probably $1,000 just to figure out how to make it, and then another couple of $1,000 to figure out how to make it, to develop a process to invent basically the technology to keep making it without destroying the vessels I needed to make it. So basically, it's bones, water, heat, and time, and a couple of other proprietary things that I might have spoken about on here. And basically, I make this whenever I'm able. I need to make some now. It's difficult to keep it on the shelf because it's an all-natural deer and rabbit repellent.
Okay.
And you basically take a paintbrush, you put it down in there, and then you put it on your tree, preferably when it's in a dormant state. And it works like nothing else out there. But you can put bars of soap out there. Trust me, if it is a deer repellent, trust me, I have used it. This is the only stuff that worked for us. And I started to think, well, if I got this problem, surely other people have this problem. So I decided to start developing it. And now there have been some copycats out there, but they don't know what I know. And there are certain things, I just told you the basic foundation of it, but there are certain things that are proprietary that cost me a lot of money to figure out. So this is how we are able. I mean, when we first put this stuff out there, we didn't have any. Now, it was a double-edged sword because so much for the deer hunting around here, because they wouldn't come around. No turkeys would come around. Nothing came around. I mean, Sasquatch wouldn't even come.
Squirrels are one of my biggest problems.
Now, does it work on squirrels? I don't know. Some people have used it for that, and they told me that it did, but I haven't personally worked on it. And then what I didn't realize is that it would actually work on voles as well. So I told you daffodils work really well, but bone sauce, after a few rains, now it stays on there when you apply it. It lasts longer than anything on the market, but it is difficult to make. It is very difficult to get it right. But once it's on there, it works like nothing else out there. So it worked so well for us that we decided we'd go ahead and take this stuff to market.
Yeah.
And so we sell it at our website when we do have it in stock, but it's tough to keep it in there because we have so many different interests going on all at the same time around here that it's difficult for me to stay on top of making this stuff to the extent that we need it. But yeah, this is why we're able to have the harvest we do. But plus we also leave back 10% for nature.
Yeah. And I am all for that. However, last August, the squirrels got all but 5 of my peaches, literally. So that's why I asked about squirrels in particular, but bunnies eating berries or whatever. Now, some of my food I do have, like aronia berry and elderberry, I have in that fenced in area that the chickens have intentional access to on and off. But I wondered about that because I've tried various things. I will be ordering some bone sauce once it's in. I'm definitely going to try that, and I'll let you know how it works for the squirrels and the peaches. But that is also a real valid concern that people have, and we need to be thinking about, because obviously if you're putting in the effort, the time, and the expense of growing a food forest, yes, we expect nature to take back some of it, but we need to also make sure that we get our just due. So that's just another layer to think about, isn't it?
Mhm.
I think we are definitely out of time for today, but we'll come back, and definitely I want to schedule a time with you about the clean and unclean food. And we'd like to talk about North Carolina another time also. But do you want to take just a minute to put in a good word for either of the two things I mentioned to you earlier in the text?
Regarding, yeah, we're in a real mess here in Western North Carolina. There's a lot of people out there that are trying to do remediation efforts. To what extent, I don't know. I know that a lot of them do not have our experience or background or education when it comes to dealing with this stuff. So we've had the soil tested. The government and the powers that shouldn't be are basically saying, oh, everything's fine. The rivers are fine. The soil's fine. Well, 3 different independent tests realized that we even have nuclear waste in certain areas around here.
Yeah, I had heard that.
And the powers that shouldn't be don't want the general public to know about it. So anyway, what we're in the middle of doing is basically using our composting, using what the Lord put on this planet to clean these places up. So it's a double-edged sword, because we were first working with other interests out here, only to realize that a lot of people are aggrandizing themselves on the, instead of going out here doing what they say they're going to do, they're out here collecting money, and where the money goes, I do not know. So in lieu of being mixed up with these people, we started our own foundation called Living Soil Foundation. And all of the money, not 20%, not 80%, not 98%, but all of the money goes against or goes for cleaning up Western North Carolina using biology. Well,
Good.
we have several sites right now, a couple of which are clandestine, because we do have certain interests out there that don't want to see this done. They would rather leave it a toxic mess. I know that sounds crazy, but that's a while for me to unfold that.
Yeah.
But in a nutshell, we're basically producing biocomplete compost, and we are out here doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing, which is cleaning up this land, and we're doing it hopefully in record time. Now, we haven't had subsequent tests to prove it, but we are basically going to show that we can clean this up in record time using what the Lord put on this planet, some of which you yourself even talked about, and that's carbon.
Yeah.
And bringing to bear everything we can to try and, not only evangelize this magnificent design science called permaculture, but also showing, most importantly, that no matter what man does to this planet, that the Lord can fix it. And that's exactly what we're trying to do through the Living Soil Foundation.
That's
So,
beautiful.
yeah, so
That's a
that's exactly
beautiful
what
thing.
we're working on. This isn't, I'll be honest, Maureen, this is not in any way, shape, or form where either one of us wanted our lives to go, but it feels like we've been kind of pushed into it. And we didn't make the hurricane come here. It did, and it destroyed a lot of things, and it polluted a lot of things. And
Yeah.
so we're going to fix it. And that's where we feel called to direct our efforts.
Okay, so we'll put a link in the show notes so that people can donate. And do you have a website where people can go to see what's happening?
We're working on a website. We have someone getting that built for us. So in a very short amount of time, we will have one. But until then, we have a Give, Send, Go
Okay.
Living Soil Foundation.
Okay, so Erin will take care of making sure that that is out there for everyone. And I really appreciate your doing that. I'm here, stuck here, but some of my friends are down there helping people in other ways. And I just don't want for North Carolina to be forgotten, especially in light of what's happening on the other coast right now, which is equally devastating and horrific. And I guess I won't say too much more.
I think I know where you're likely to go with this, and
Yeah.
have no fear that I'm in probably lockstep with you.
Yeah, I think you probably are. So on both coasts, both problems. And the greatest thing that bothers me in this life is how evil men can be and the harm that they do to other people.
Yep.
And I think that's at the heart of both of these situations, and the other as well. The other that we can talk about on another date, but what people do to each other is, I just can't stand it. So I try not to think about it too much, but unfortunately we're confronted with issues. So we'd like to help in whatever ways we can in North Carolina. I'm hoping to maybe come down and help in some way in the spring or early summer, or maybe midsummer when I'm not away quite as much. But if you hear of something or think of something, you'll have to let me know. But in the meantime, we'll help, and we'll look for the website. Once you have it ready, you can let us know, and we will advertise that as well. But for now, we've gone about 20 minutes over time, and so we're going to sign off. But I'll remind everyone to check out the God's Good Table, God-Given Food as Medicine event at Melvin's Farm to Fork, April 25th through 26th, as well as Dr. Cowan's garden products. And definitely also, well, actually, I'm going to put up this, your website is right here, I think. There we go. Perma Pastures Farm is your home and your business. And I know that our viewers will want to check that out as well. So for now, we'll say goodbye. And I very much look forward. Oh, I can't keep forgetting that. I'll very much look forward to reconnecting with the two of you both in person and to talk about the clean and unclean foods. So we'll be in touch about that. But everyone, thank you very much for listening in. Thank you for your comments. We really do appreciate when you like and subscribe. It helps us a lot. And you can also buy us a glass of milk if you'd like. So all of that is useful and beneficial. So until next week, which we are interviewing Dr. Erin McNichols. And I have to remember the lineup for the coming weeks, but we've got a few good things coming. Unfortunately, Natasha Campbell McBride and I have not been able to make our schedules work yet, but I think once she gets back home after helping her mom, we'll be able to make that happen. So for now, we'll sign off. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week.